And now we're moving on to our final panel, which I'm really excited about, Publishing Health AI, How Journals Are Shaping the Future of Health AI. And I must admit, I've got a vested interest in this. As many academics know, sometimes it can take up to 1 year to get a journal accepted. So I'm really excited about what editors are considering in deciding whether to accept journals submissions or not. And fun fact about this panel, I think that they've got the most air miles to fly in to join us today. I think all the way from Norway, we first of all have Dr. Charlotte Haug, who is the executive editor at NEJM AI. We also have Dr. Chris Paton, who is the associate professor in health AI, University of Auckland, editor-in-chief, BMJ. He's flown in all the way from New Zealand, so thank you. We've got Yulin Hswen, associate professor, UCSF, UC Berkeley, associate editor at JAMA and JAMA and AI. And this will be moderated by Stanford's very own Dr. Nigam Shah, chief data scientist, Stanford Healthcare. So please, thank you.
What I would like us to do for this panel, and it's getting the afternoon, keep it a little bit spicy, is like a minute from each of you on, in your role as editors in the whole tent of AI, New England Journal, JAMA, BMJ, what is it you wish people in the room submitted? Start with you.
I wish, even if it's a very rapidly developing field, I wish people would take the time to evaluate prospectively, use the standard methods of scientific discovery, register their intentions beforehand. That's what I would like to do. And I would like people to pay attention to the outcomes. Is it clinically relevant? Is it relevant for patients, for healthcare systems? Think about that.
I think that for us, it's, our audience is very clinical, so something that has an impact, where it can be used immediately, by clinicians, by patients as well. I think we're moving in such a rapid field that anything that's translational, I think, is really important, where you're in the real world and deploying it, I think, is something that we are really looking for.
Hi, so our journal's just a new journal, so it's the BMJ Digital Health and AI Journal. And the reason why we exist really is we want to be able to provide frontline clinicians with the knowledge that they need to decide whether or not to use a new tool or to adopt a type of technology. And I think we've heard quite a lot that it's quite difficult for clinicians to understand how effective these tools are, what they mean for practice. So what I'd really like our journal to be is a place where a normal clinician can read a paper and they can understand, oh, this is going to be useful for my clinical practice. I understand, that evidence is needed when I'm doing something in clinical practice, and this article lays out the evidence clearly in a way I can understand, and I kind of trust it, because I think there's a real problem with expecting clinicians to understand how AI works. It's going to be very difficult, but somebody's got to understand how it works before we implement it. We can't just implement black boxes and hope that they work. So I think that's the kind of role of our journal.
All right, so that black box was not a plant. I was hoping somebody would say it. So just to quickly recap the words that at least I heard: prospective, state upfront what you're going to do, impact on patients, clinicians, and explain it in a way that I can understand as a doctor, what am I going to do tomorrow? Love it. But these things are black boxes. And when a big tech company builds a model, we don't have access to it. I can do an impact study, but when a researcher tries to explain it, we're guessing how it works. And we can explain it at a high level, but we don't have access to the actual machinery that is producing the output or the impact study that has been done. And the fact that it may not generalize if we take it to another site. So how do you recommend that the people in the audience, particularly students, postdocs, deal with that issue?
Okay, it's an extremely important question and issue, and something that we will have to deal with differently than we do right now. We discuss a lot in our editorial meetings about transparency, reproducibility. If it's not possible to reproduce, is it really correct to publish? So we will have to find ways that we can still sort of respect the business, patents, things like that, but researchers it will be necessary to reproduce the research. Otherwise, whether or not we understand everything that's in the black box, that's one thing, but there will have to be ways to be transparent, at least for some people, if not for everybody.
Okay. And we will get back to that for sure. Queuing you up. Yes.
So I interpreted that question a little bit differently, and I agree with everything that you're saying. I think sometimes maybe that's my 2 cents and not fully representative of JAMA, but if it is impacting lives and is making a difference, at what point does it matter? Like, to be honest, too, at the same time. You know, and I think that you need to be transparent, and sometimes I think, you know, especially with the methodology that is being used, we often get the comment that, you know, for instance, JAMA might only be 3,000 words, so how can you actually be fully transparent in that way? So maybe it should be published in another format. But again, when it comes to actually deploying these kind of, again, these really impactful type of, you know, tools, you know, I think it's important to be able to get that out there. And sometimes I feel that it holds us back a little bit.
So I think there's probably 2 aspects to that. I think one is people do understand what they're doing and the tool that they've created, but they just don't want to openly share it. And I think sometimes there's good reasons for that. So if you're about to submit a patent application, or there's a patient confidentiality issue or something like that, then as long as you can explain that to the journal in a convincing way, then I think that's a reasonable thing to do. And maybe there's some mitigating things that you can do, like saying you're going to publish it later after you've got your patent or something like that. Then there's a kind of bigger issue, which is we don't know what the kind of weights of a model mean, or we don't know, you know, what a model's doing at a kind of fundamental level. And the analogy a lot of people say is, well, we don't know how the human body works at that level either. There's a lot of drugs, we don't know why they work or how they work. A lot of interventions that are done just seem to work. That's why we do them. And I think, again, there you go for the, you kind of try your hardest to be able to explain what you can. So explaining why you chose a particular structure or a particular set of technologies that you've used because you think that this is going to improve the model, describing the model diagrammatically, saying, kind of hypothesizing about what the model is going to do. So you wouldn't want to not publish something because we can't fully explain how the model works, but we want people to be open and honest and say why they've done things in that way to make things as reproducible as possible. But then also bearing in mind that there are sometimes reasons where you can't share that for commercial or patient data reasons, other things like that.
All right, so we're going to now up the game a little bit. So reproducibility came up. So there's an author in the audience who has a real problem, not at your journals, but another leading journal, where they have an AI tool that can take a toxic protein sequence and change the amino acids to create a new protein that is equally toxic or worse. And the journal is asking that all the code, the model, has to be published to make it reproducible. How would you handle that situation?
Now you're talking about whether to publish research that can be dangerous, where the outcome is dangerous.
Yeah. And it is a genuine advance in AI and in protein science.
Well, we wouldn't publish that at the NEJM AI, but that's just because it's not clinical, so I'm avoiding the difficult questions. Giving it.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I can have a go at it if you like. Yeah. So that's not a new kind of thing that's happened, I would say. I mean, I think that's something's been happening for years, like the potentially dangerous chemicals and things like that. And it is way outside of the remit of what we would do as well. But I know that there are mechanisms for having the peer reviewers have access to what they need in order to be able to peer review, and the editors having access. And that if it's so severe, it might be like government gets involved or something like that. But there's mechanisms of doing it, and openly sharing it, I think, might not be the right way, depending on what it is and how toxic. It might be a difference of opinion about the toxicity, for example. It might be that the peer reviewers and the editors don't consider it to be dangerous, which is why they're asking for it. But there are, there's always ways. I mean, journals have been around for a long time. All the kind of challenges that we keep coming at. It's been quite nice for me starting a new journal with the BMJ, because BMJ's been around, I don't know, for like more than 100 years, and they've got lots of other journals that are all tackling difficult topics, and there's quite a nice community there where we can go and ask these questions. Like if that came up, I wouldn't just try and deal with it. I would kind of escalate it, and then there would be issues like that had come up before. So yeah, I would say a dialogue with the editors, get specific reasons, and then maybe escalate it through the journal, so the editors aren't necessarily the final straw at the journal.
I mean, I think one of the problems is that, journals, we don't talk to each other. So the fact that, you're asking this question and we're discussing it at the moment, I feel as though like we should be having a kind of a standard in general across journals, right? For all of this, and what we deem as transparent, what we request, and we don't have that. And so I think this is a discussion that, that's great that we're having right now, so that we can kind of try to figure that out.
That is a great suggestion. We standardize reporting of observational studies, of clinical trials. Perhaps for high-risk situations, there might be some consensus coming from the editors. That would be awesome. All right, so we'll back away from biological risk, go back to patients and doctors. Humans are a little bit safer. But even there, different countries have different regulations around what constitutes de-identified data, what can be published, what can be released. How do you typically balance the tension between wanting reproducibility and the PI not being able to procure the necessary approvals? And that process itself can create such a long delay that by the time the things get out, it might become irrelevant. So how do you reconcile that in your own work?
Oh, I think I'm like very different than this panel and what potentially, I think that I don't know I think we're too slow. I think it's just, but I do believe in this reproducibility and that, we need to be able to continue to do this science in a replicable manner. But I think I think that we need to be able to adapt in some form to be able to, to be able to still do the work that we're able to do and get the information out there.
This is a question that's getting more and more difficult. When I started working with these questions maybe 10 years ago, I think we all were thinking that we were in a world where we would get closer to each other and where it would be easier to share data, and we're moving in that direction. And now we are in the opposite situation where coming from Europe, we have our own regulation. Of course, you in the US had regulation, now it's deregulation. China, Asia has their, and so we are in a very different situation from what I thought we would be 10 years ago, for example, when we had our first meeting. And we will have to have ways we cannot force researchers in different countries to share across borders right now, so that we will have to find other ways to test or get access to metadata, for example.
Yeah, so basically, access and reproducibility are in a little bit of a tension right now.
Yes.
And that is something I'm sure people in the audience have probably dealt with. So let's, we're not going to solve that tension in 6 minutes and 38 seconds. So we can shift gears a little bit. What's in your wish list? Like, apart from prospective, reproducible, and impact, the pace at which the technology is moving is so fast. There's a true case, one of our authors, faculty had a paper in JAMA, got reviewed, almost accepted, and then GPT-4 came out, and they had to redo the whole study. How do you recommend we researchers think about the publishing enterprise, given all the constraints under which academic publishing operates?
I think, it's happening very fast and things are changing very fast. At the same time, things haven't changed so much for patients. And I wish the patient view would be more prominent. We've had, several panels here, and I'm not sure everything is going to be so profitable. I think it may be an advantage for clinicians, for patients, and maybe we should slow down a little bit. Maybe we shouldn't be caught in this thought that everything is so very, very fast. Maybe we should just concentrate it on our main objective, which is to improve care for patients, not only here, but patients who do not have care, for example.
I think that tension is difficult, right? Because people want to get their work out there before, like you said, it's outdated. I think the part of it is the onus is on us as journals too. Like, we're trying to be faster in that realm, but it is challenging, like, to get reviewers and to get that speed. But I think in order for us to really kind of, again, adapt in this world, we need AI on our side too, to be able to kind of speedline kind of the process as well. So I do think that the onus is on us to be faster.
I do think kind of generally we could speed up the process of publishing. I'd like to see, on my wish list, I'd like to see reliable AI tools that can help with that process. So I don't necessarily think that current tools are sufficient for doing things like literature reviews or like being a peer reviewer, for example. I've seen there's quite a lot of conferences now who are now using a large language model as part of the peer review team. I personally don't think that they're good enough yet, but I'm pretty excited that soon they will be, and I think that might help speed things up. I think also we need to think a bit differently from how we currently publish things for specific use cases. So things like large language model, like the classic problem probably why you're raising this is because we had GPT-2 that wasn't very good, then quickly GPT-3, GPT 3.5, GPT-4, then we've got all these new models. They're kind of coming out every couple of months. And there's no way that you can go through like a journal publishing process of what is the kind of USMLE pass rate for this and try and publish it each time. I think it was interesting to do that for the first few models. But then I think you've got to say, okay, why are we publishing this in the first place? We're trying to add to kind of scientific knowledge so that people can use it and do things with it. And it's got to be, useful in the scientific progress. And that's the speed by which we need to go, really, rather than just trying to keep up with the latest technology.
Mm-hmm. So we have these competing tensions of speed, rigor, reproducibility. And I think you touched on this point really well. We don't have to publish every little technical thing or chase every little technical advance. So I just did a PubMed search for artificial intelligence, double quotes, how many papers per year. In the first 6 months of 2025, we have had about 220,000, 225,000. So we'll close out the year with 400,000 or more new PubMed entries with artificial intelligence in them. And if we take the lens of how many of them are evaluating the model versus how many of them are evaluating its impact on the physician or patient care or whichever way you define impact, the number is vanishingly small. So what I would love to hear from you is, what are the incentives that you can think of for the researchers to stop chasing that, I submitted 3 questions to GPT and I got three of them right. But how do you incentivize us to focus on impact?
Well, by publishing your research, so that's the incentive that we can give you, So we talk about clinical relevance all the time, and we are not publishing those questions to the different large language models and getting it right. We are not doing that anymore. We did that in the beginning because we're a new journal, but now we really want to give you visibility. If you publish, if you take the time to do rigorous research that is important for patients.
I think again, it is the publishing aspect, but I think being in any of these journals just really kind of elevates your research, and as well as your name and your lab to a high extent, and we're very trusted in our realm. So I think there's that aspect. I think similarly with you and your journals, we highlight you in a lot of our multimedia and a lot of our channels. There's a lot of visibility, and I think still to this day, you really see that clinicians really value these journals as a way to really change practice and care, and so that publishing in our journals will actually have impact.
Yeah, I think sometimes publishing about a model in a clinical journal is actually really interesting for clinicians. So like you're saying, when ChatGPT came out, it was actually interesting for doctors just to say, okay, it could pass the USMLE. That was interesting the first time it was said, and it was interesting that the newer models were getting better at it. And there's all sorts of aspects of it that are interesting for clinical care, and the kind of conversation's changing a bit around that. But really what they want to know is, how's this going to change my clinical practice? How's this going to benefit my patients? How's this going to change how I work? And those are the kind of things that we're really interested in publishing. So just, you've worked on something scientific that's really interesting, you've got some good results, but just think through what is the actual impact for the clinician sitting there busy in their office. Are they going to want to read this paper and find it interesting and help it change their practice?
So we're kind of hearing pretty consistent themes. Focus on impact, do it prospectively, and impact on physicians and patients. So I would turn it over to the audience, just show of hands. How many of you are doing that kind of research? Okay, what is everybody else doing? I expected everybody to raise hands. Anyway, so we'll have a few minutes for audience questions. I'll open it up to the floor. I'm trying to get us back on track as well, so if you see I'm rushing, I am. Yes, please.
Ala Yusuf, former Stanford and Chief AI Officer at Basis.ai. So I have been in academia and I really care a lot about AI integration workflow. I think a theme that has been happening is coming from an implementation science lens and working in AI research is that most of what we publish on is how effective this model is. But even in education, we have an implementation context that tells what's the workflow. I think most of what has been currently lacking is we know this model work in this workflow, but we don't know what this workflow look like. So do you see the future of health AI to be really more changing in terms of expectations of what researchers would be providing? Like what information, I guess, in the articles will be helpful to clinician? I would be interested to get perspectives on what do you think is going to be, from a knowledge dissemination, important in the next era of publishing?
Yep, so I think what's useful for clinicians don't really, I would say, don't really care too much what the kind of in the lab performance of the model is. Because as there's an article from 1972 published in the BMJ about the Leeds abdominal pain score computer system that was introduced into the emergency department. I don't know if anyone knows about this. It had really fantastic accuracy for diagnosing abdominal pain. It had 92% accuracy, better than the clinicians. And it never got adopted, and we don't know about it anymore, and published in the BMJ. And that was an example of just, this is what the model does and how it performs, isn't it fantastic? But then when you put it into the clinical environment, if it doesn't fit in with the workflow, if people don't find it useful, if people feel it undermines what they're doing, and there's all sorts of complexities that people don't talk about. It's not like a rule book for the AI is going to work in these conditions. So I think you have to think about it from that point of view. So you don't necessarily have to publish all of that together, but something like research on ethnographic observations, process mapping, interviews with end users who are going to do that, that kind of qualitative research to show that you're thinking about that whole process and thinking about how it's going to be implemented. The kind of implementation science of these systems is really important. So do the kind of studies where you need to get through to get from the lab into the clinical workplace. But I wouldn't say you have to publish all of that in one paper. And quite often it would be nice to have linked papers where you've got mixed methods research showing how the whole system can work together.
All right, I'm looking at that clock, which is blinking red. So we have to cut short questions quite a bit. Thank you so much for tolerating provocative questions. And hopefully the words will stick: prospective, patient and physician impact, and don't study models. Thank you.